Good morning. I'm Assemblyman Robert Auth, and this press conference is to discuss the physician-assisted suicide law. I want to start by saying to physicians, doctors, you are not allowed to prescribe the poison for facilitating suicide. I want to say to pharmacists, you are not allowed to fill any prescriptions of the poison that would facilitate suicide. There's a temporary restraining order prohibiting the law to go into effect, and the Attorney General is currently preparing a restraining order. I'd like to introduce E. David Smith from Smith Associates to come up and discuss the legal ramifications of what we're doing here today. David, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. And thank you to Assemblyman Auth. I want to start today with a prayer for all those people that are sick and all those people that are terminally ill. My client is a doctor who seeks to heal people, and there's no question that many people are suffering in this state from all kinds of illnesses, whether they're emotional, physical, mental, and so forth. And I'd like to ask God to send healing to all those people. On behalf of my client and our firm, that we really would like to see every person healed and as soon as possible. And we pray for a complete and absolute healing for every person that's ill. I'd also like to thank Assemblyman Auth, who's taken leadership in both opposing this statute that was put into effect and introducing two other statutes that have attempted to change this law, both in increasing the penalties for someone who tries to coerce someone to take a poison, and also to actually repeal the legislation. And it's obviously in my client's best interest and all the people of New Jersey, I believe, that this law is repealed, and that's why we brought on behalf of our client this litigation to prevent the Physician-Assisted Suicide Act from going into effect. Although Assemblyman Auth is a Republican, as you all know, for us and for my client, this is not a political matter. This is something, as you know, that the legislation only passed by one vote in the Assembly and one vote in the Senate. This is not a political issue. This is something that affects people of all political beliefs, people of all religions, people of all social economic statuses, people of all races, people of all immigration statuses. Everyone who is a resident of the state of New Jersey is affected by this law and is affected by the ability, what we believe is creating a separate category of human beings called a life unworthy of life. And everyone should recognize that this statute is beginning that process of creating that separate classification. And Dr. Glassman himself, who's had the courage to step forward and file this litigation, is really representative for all doctors in the state and all patients, and including those patients that themselves may have wanted to take a poison on October the 16th, may be themselves despairing of any hope. And his point is in representing that all these people, although they may feel desperate, they may feel without hope, is that every single human being's life is worth living until the last breath. And that is something that is important for all of us to remember, and that's what we're here to say, is that every single human being is worth living until the last breath. My client is not here today because my client, as you know, is a doctor, and he is busy saving lives. This is what he does every day, as do so many doctors in this state. And I want to bring out at the outset that my client is bringing this litigation at great personal sacrifice. We didn't expect, well, first of all, it takes fortitude to have to, put your name up front. But in addition, he's now coming under pressure, and we'd say under attack for his position. And this is an attack that all doctors in New Jersey will come under. The law specifically states that a doctor is not required to pass on the files, not required to participate in this, but is required to pass on the files, the medical records, to a doctor, what we would call the killing doctor, the doctor who will prescribe the poison to a person who wishes to take their own life. And Dr. Glassman is unwilling to do that, both because as a doctor, he's prohibited from assisting in the death of a patient, because that person remains his patient. But also, as a God-fearing person, he is prohibited from assisting in the life termination of ending life of any human being. So already he has received attacking emails that have been sent to a hospital that he works for, accusing him of not being willing to transfer files to the killing doctor. And he's also received inquiring calls from different medical practitioner services that he works for, asking about his position, why is he taking this stance? So we have to realize that as much as the proponents of the bill try to say that doctors are not obligated to participate in this law if they don't want to participate, they only have to merely pass on the file. But the fact of the matter is there are many doctors in this state, and I've been approached since we received the temporary restraining order by other doctors who have said to me personally, thank you for the stance that we've taken and Dr. Glassman has taken to prevent this from going into effect. All these doctors that, for whatever their motivation is, whether it's religious or care about their patient or desire to uphold their oath to make sure that every patient is able to live as long as possible, they do not participate in their premature death and do not help them get killed, every doctor in this state should realize that this is about you. Your ability to practice medicine as you believe should be practiced is under threat here. Dr. Glassman, as I said, his position is he will not participate in any way whatsoever under any circumstances with the premature ending of a patient's life, any patient, and that means any way. When we've appeared in court, and I just want to clarify the legal status also, we received, thank God, a temporary restraining order from Judge Innes, Mercer County Superior Court last Wednesday, and subsequently, on Friday afternoon, the Attorney General's office filed what's called an emergency motion for leave to appeal with the Appellate Division. That motion was granted, which means that now the Attorney General is permitted to appeal it. It does not change the temporary restraining order at this time. What will happen is that this Wednesday, the Attorney General is required to submit briefs, and then on Friday, Dr. Glassman is required to submit briefs. So the court has issued no ruling or any change in the temporary restraining order, and that no order will come forth according to the current litigation posture until the Appellate Division reviews the papers. The point that Dr. Glassman wants to bring across to everybody is that suicide by any other name is still suicide, and murder by any other name is still murder. Euthanasia by any other name is still euthanasia. And this litigation is very, very careful in trying to play a game in using the words very carefully to not call it suicide. In fact, it has a provision that says you can't call it suicide. It has a provision you can't call it murder or euthanasia by law. But the fact of the matter is it's really game playing with names. Because at the end of the day, the only way that they're able to accomplish this is to say that because a doctor is approving this, well, it's not really suicide, even though the person's taking the poison themselves. And because the doctor is not giving the medication, it's not really murder or euthanasia, but then what is it? It is really both. It really has elements of suicide and it has elements of murder and euthanasia. And there's been such a campaign across the country by people outside the state to sanitize the truth of this matter and to use different words to try to capture a branding position that makes it sound like this is not about suicide and murder. So you have organizations like Compassion and Choice that will say that they're about compassion. Well, I have news for you. Dr. Glassman gives his life day and night for compassion for his clients, for his patients. And he's the one that's truly compassionate, because there is no, when you have suicide and murder, is never compassionate. And it's never a choice and it's never an option. We cannot create artificially some sort of idea that choice is primary and that everyone has a choice to do whatever they want, especially in any time, in any generation. But today what we face is a rise in tragic, day after day we read news of suicide, the suicide rates among teenagers, among people of all areas of life. And it's important to emphasize that the suicide rates are increasing across the board, not just in the teenager area. It applies to everybody, professionals, businessmen, politicians, lawyers, doctors, and people who are teenagers, people who are not veterans, a very high rate of suicide, unfortunately, tragically, all across the board. And it's particularly shocking that at a time when the media and everybody is going out to warn people about suicide, try to provide resources to support people that they should not commit suicide, that they should be aware that there is hope, life is worth living, that the state of New Jersey is saying, 1 second, that's all true except for people that are terminally ill. What this law does is it creates a separate class of people. The separate class of people is people who the state has now determined their lives are unworthy of life. And if you look at the law of the state of New Jersey, suicide is illegal. It's an illegal act, and it's also illegal to assist somebody in suicide, with an act of suicide. Why is it illegal to commit suicide? Why is it illegal to assist someone in committing suicide? Because the message of humanity across all religions and all beliefs is that human life is precious. Human life is something that we do everything possible to preserve for even one more breath. So that applies to everybody, whether the person is a homeless person in Newark, or an assemblyman, or a CEO of a company, or a school teacher, or a teenager who's being bullied. Every single person's life is worth extending. No matter what they see on the horizon, their life is worth extending. However, the state has come along and said, 1 second, there's a new class of people called a life unworthy of life. And the danger here and why this is not allowed is because there is no life unworthy of life. No matter what the law attempts to portray in terms of the consent, in terms of that it's under medical supervision, and that it's willful, it is not that we cannot allow the state to create a new category of people, life unworthy of life. Because once we allow the state to do that, then it's only a matter of time. It's not just a matter of time. There's a new class of people. Now, why 6 months? Why not 8 months? Why not 12 months? Why just terminally ill? What about a person who suffers from tremendous depression? People suffer from depression. It's worse many times than the physical suffering of a terminal illness. So we cannot allow the creation of a class of people, life unworthy of life, which this statute does. This statute says if a person, God forbid, has less than 6 months to live, by the mere speculation of a doctor and a consulting physician, it's all speculation. In fact, there are studies that show between 12 and 16% of people in hospice survive hospice care. There are people that survive these terminal illnesses. In fact, many of the people who testified for and against this legislation were people who were terminally ill for long periods of time and came back to testify year after year as this wound its way through the legislature. They were still around, and thank God, because our prayer extends, and Dr. Glassman's prayer, hope, extends to those people that support this bill. They should continue to live, and they should be able to have a complete recovery. You know, the media always is looking for sound bites, in some ways understandably, because you have a short amount of time to present a concept. And so I'm sure you'll take certain parts out of this, but this is really a point that I hope that you'll all present in its completeness. And that is that we must emphasize to every person in the state of New Jersey that they can never give up hope. Never give up hope to the last breath. There is always, always something that can be done. And their lives are valuable both for themselves and those around them that are caring for them until the last breath. There is no death sentence allowed to be proclaimed by a doctor through saying terminal illness. Terminal illness only means a reasonable medical certainty. And we know that reasonable medical certainty is 100% speculation because it's based on statistics. It's based on statistics. How can you turn this person into a statistic and say because he has or she has certain presenting conditions, therefore, that's it, less than 6 months? And I would like to share a story with you that's brought in the Talmud, the story of the prophet Isaiah that lived in the time of the king of Israel, King Chizkiyahu. And King Chizkiyahu became deathly ill. And God said to the prophet Isaiah, go visit the king. He's sick. Regardless of the personalities as who has to visit who, the prophet has to visit the king or the king the prophet. You, the prophet, now he's sick, he's going to die, he's deathly ill. God didn't say he's going to die, he's deathly ill. Go visit him. So the prophet Isaiah came to King Chizkiyahu and he said, I've come to visit you now that you're so sick. And he told him why he was so sick. He had decided not to have children because he foresaw that some of his children would not be upstanding citizens, and he decided to refrain from having children. So Isaiah said, because of that, you're going to die. And the king responded to him, your prophecy has been terminated. You have no authority. Even though you're a prophet of God, you have no authority to tell someone that they're going to die. And how much more so that applies to a doctor who's not a prophet. He doesn't even have or pretend to have the status of a prophet or divine inspiration. He is merely sent to heal. So King Chizkiyahu said to Isaiah the prophet, he said, you have been terminated as a prophet because you have now proclaimed death upon a man, and that is outside your purview as a prophet. And then King Chizkiyahu proceeded to say, I learned from my grandfather, King David, who everyone knows King David. I learned from my grandfather, King David, that even if a point of a sword is on your throat and you think you're about to die from the sword that is on your neck, the word language in Hebrew is al yimnei es atzmai min arachmim. Do not prevent yourself from divine mercy. Do not ever give up hope that you'll be saved and something will change. And that's what the message we have to give every single person, whether it's a teenager who's suffering from bullying, whether it's a person who just lost their job, whether it's a veteran who is suffering from memories that he cannot escape of terrible battles, whether it's a person who's terminally ill and has had a death sentence pronounced by their doctor. In fact, 77%, up to 77%, according to an NIH study, of terminally ill people suffer from depression. Well, why not? If they've been told they're going to die in less than 6 months, that's a pretty depressing piece of news. And that's why we have to hold the stand, to tell people, no, there's always hope, no matter what. Whatever your belief is, whether you believe or not, the fact is there's always hope. And our job as human beings is always to extend that hope. That's each one of us, whether you're in the media, whether you're a politician, whether you're a doctor, lawyer, policeman, that is your job. I told the judge when we were at the hearing about this concept of creating a separate class of people. I said to the judge, if anyone in this courtroom was to announce right now that they are going to commit suicide, everyone would leap into action to save that person's life, including the sheriff's deputy who's sitting here doing his job protecting the courtroom. He would even be willing to give up his life. How many stories have we read about police officers and firefighters have gone to risk their lives into water, out building ledges, to save a person who feels despair? So if that happened in this courtroom right now, the agent of the state, the sheriff's deputy, would do everything possible to save that person. But now we have a law that says if a person has less than 6 months to live, he does not deserve the protection of the state anymore. That sheriff's deputy will not come to save him. No fireman will come to save his life because the state has determined that that life is a life unworthy of life. Before I turn to the law in New Jersey, I want to share something that's relevant to all of us. And I believe it's important to mention this because everyone goes these days to Holocaust memorials. Everyone goes. It's now become part of the education of every citizen. But we have to understand that when we go to a Holocaust memorial, the big focus is on the big effect, the big fact that so many people died. And it's not just 6 million Jews, there were millions of other people that died. How did all this start? Who were those doctors that ran the concentration camps? Those doctors started with what was then a secret program called the T4 program, where the German government had decided that there was life unworthy of life. There were children born with developmental disabilities. There were children who showed no help of being able to heal, and those, I know this is disturbing, but this is what happened. Those children were taken from their parents. They were taken to these T4, what's called the T4 program. They were euthanized in the original gas chambers and then cremated. And this is a historical fact. Then that was extended to the elderly. The German administration sent around a questionnaire, which you could find the questionnaire online, asking who's chronically ill, who shows no hope of recovery. and sent that to the nursing homes. The nursing homes didn't even know why they were getting the questionnaires. They just answered according to they thought it was a statistical study. Well, buses showed up from this program to take those elderly and ill handicapped people to the T4 program, where they were then euthanized. And people will say, when I tell that story, which is, you have to know that, Germany was the most logical, most advanced society ever to walk the face of the earth. And yet doctors were able to do that, and those doctors were then taken, and they were the ones running the concentration camps. Because why were they able to run the concentration camps? So here comes the critical point that we all have to know. That the proponents of this law will say, oh, how could that ever happen in America? After all, there's judges and all doctors, and no one would ever do that. But here's the key point. What the German administration did was they slowly brought about desensitization to life among these doctors. Once you desensitize yourself to the value of life, the first time ending someone's life is a lot of upheaval. The second time, less, and so on and so forth, until a person can do thousands and millions of people. And the line that we have to fight here for is the sensitization, the sensitivity to life and the value of human life. That while a person is breathing, that is something that we hold as precious and sacred. That's something that we will not allow ourselves to become desensitized and to go ahead and terminate that life. That's the key. The key is not to look around here now and say, well, my doctor would never do that. The point is, people will be desensitized over time. And the judges will be desensitized over time. And the police officer desensitized. Everyone becomes desensitized. In fact, if you look at the Hippocratic Oath, the original Hippocratic Oath forbids, it says, I will not give a poison to my patient, even if requested. And in so many places today, in so many medical schools, that has been taken out. That phrase has been taken out. So what this indicates to us is that we are on the cusp of a desensitization to human life. When Dr. Kevorkian started euthanizing people, he was considered, I remember I was much younger at the time, obviously. Everyone thought he was a nutcase. He was called the doctor of death. Now, in May, there were 26 doctors in the state of New Jersey who said in an article online that they were willing to give this poison to their patients. What has come of us? That must be distressing to all of us. That 26 doctors, and those are the ones who are willing to say it publicly. And I don't know how many there were that would say it privately or be willing to do it privately. But this is the line that our client wants to hold, that we do treat every life as precious. There is always hope. No matter what you're experiencing, no matter where you are, there is always hope. And our job as human beings is to extend that hope to you. Each one of us has our ups and downs. So when I'm up, I want to extend my hope to you. And if I'm down, I hope that you're going to extend your hope to me. No matter what my circumstances are, no matter what your circumstances are, no matter who you are, no matter what disagreements you might have had in the past about anything, the fact of the matter is this is about humanity and this is about human life. And the state of New Jersey, the Supreme Court in the state of New Jersey has recognized this. In fact, there was a case 43 years ago, the case of Quinlan. And in the case of Quinlan, which many of you may remember, there was a case of a young lady who ended up on life support. And the question was, can she or could her father withdraw that life support? And it posed a very, very compelling question and trying question to the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey. And the fascinating thing was that the Attorney General's office at that time was fighting her ability to be taken off life support. And that's part of the tragedy of how far we've come. If anyone wants to imagine how far things could go, we see that in 43 years the Attorney General was fighting to keep a woman who was on a respirator alive, and today the Attorney General is fighting to allow people to kill themselves. So the Supreme Court in Quinlan said, in permitting her to be taken off life support, said, we would see, however, a real distinction between the self-infliction of deadly harm and a self-determination against artificial life support. The court in that case said that assisted suicide is not allowed. Even a person who is terminally ill, whatever you want to call it, whatever amount of pain they're in, it is not allowed. That's what the Supreme Court in New Jersey said in the Quinlan matter. And for the press, we'll, if you need copies of any of this, we could send it to you, so if you need to be able to get the quotes and so forth. Furthermore, the court in Quinlan said medical science is not authorized to directly cause natural death. This is what the Supreme Court of New Jersey said. Now, the fact of the matter is the principles that we are talking about are things that have predated the state of New Jersey and will survive the state of New Jersey. The primacy of human life is a principle of humanity that has always existed. We don't need the New Jersey Supreme Court to tell us that. But the fact is the New Jersey Supreme Court put it in black and white that they recognize this. And they said that in allowing for Ms. Quinlan to be removed from the artificial life support, they said that they're doing this without at the same time leaving an opening for euthanasia, meaning to say that they were making a very clear carve-out for a very exceptional situation brought about by the advancement of medicine that allowed for artificial life support. And in a very unique situation, they were allowing her to be that to be discontinued. But they were making it clear, no suicide is allowed. Medicine must be used for healing, not for causing harm. And there's no opening for euthanasia. And of course, the New Jersey Supreme Court must hold by that standard. In the case, we have a number of causes of action, and I'm happy to answer questions about the specific ones. But one of the ones that the judge honed in on was the fact that there's a total lack of regulation. This is a process for the death of human beings. And it specifically states in the statute that there's a number of state agencies that are required to promulgate regulations. Those include the Division of Consumer Affairs, which is under the Attorney General, under the Department of Law and Public Safety, the State Board of Medical Examiners, the State Board of Pharmacy, the State Board of Psychological Examiners, the State Board of Social Work Examiners. All these are required to promulgate regulations. Now, the Attorney General's office tried to argue in court that it says, well, as necessary. Well, of course regulation is necessary. The law does not tell us what kind of medications, what the poisons are allowed, does not tell any, many details are left unknown, including various parts of the law that specifically say that the regulations have to be promulgated as to how notification should occur. The judge honed in on the point that what this law requires is a sea change in the way medicine has been practiced. Doctors in the state of New Jersey are not allowed to bring about the death of their patients. And this law allows it. And the judge pointed out, this is a sea change in the way medicine is practiced. There needs to be regulations for this. And the legislature clearly saw that when they wrote that these regulations need to be promulgated. I also want to bring to your attention the lack of equal protection. We made a number of arguments. First Amendment rights, religious freedom rights, Fifth Amendment rights not to lose life and liberty, and equal protection. And we have a whole slew here of points, but fundamentally, once a person is in this category of life unworthy of life, they are now subject to unequal protection of the law, including the fact that insurance companies, and this is not a fictional story, insurance companies have withheld life-saving treatments or potentially life-saving treatments or speculatively life-saving treatments or ones that are under development from people in this country that have physician-assisted suicide because it's $100,000 a treatment, and then told the patient that, well, if you want to take the poison, it's $1.29 copay. And we believe that's an unequal protection of the laws, that an insurance company would pay for a poison for $1.29 copay and say we're not going to pay for things that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. There's also no duty to warn and protect, amazingly. Today, firearms are all the discussion about people who are mentally ill, people who have no reason to live. And so everyone has a duty to warn and protect, which means to say that if you're a psychiatrist, psychologist, doctor, and your patient clearly looks like they're going to do something with a firearm or without a firearm, you have a duty to protect warn and protect. And in fact, the statute has, the existing statute has requirements to notify the local police director and bring this to the attention of the authorities, but specifically carves out someone who's terminally ill and has requested this medication when they've already made it clear that they intend to terminate their own life. That's a complete abrogation of the responsibility to warn and protect. In addition, people don't realize this person's going to take these poisons home, and it's completely unregulated, the use of these poisons and the way they're going to be treated afterwards. And the statute's very vague. It says you should appoint, not you, God forbid, but someone should appoint to someone else to dispose of it in lawful means. But as we've written to the U.S. Attorney's Office, that this violates federal law. The federal law requires all kinds of controls for controlled substances, which surely something that's poison is, as to how it's going to be used and disposed of. All that's absent from the law and the regulations. I'd also like to point out really what I see as a tragedy is the position of the Attorney General today. And again, this is not a political thing. I would say this regardless of the party of the Attorney General. But after this hearing, we wrote a letter immediately when we got back to our office in Bloomfield. We wrote a letter to the Attorney General, and again, this could all be provided to the media. And we said that the Attorney General has a duty to warn and duty to tell the population that the law is no longer in effect. We had actually put in temporary restraining order a requirement that the Attorney General take down the website that says that assisted suicide is permitted in New Jersey. The judge, for reasons he didn't disclose, he struck that provision, and he didn't want to give a direct order to the Attorney General to take it down. But logically speaking, we don't need a judge's order to tell me that the duty of the Attorney General of New Jersey is to let people in New Jersey know what the law is. So we wrote a letter on August the 14th telling the telling the Attorney General that he has a duty to take the following immediate actions: inform all New Jersey physicians and pharmacists that the act has been enjoined, and update the state's website to reflect the current status of the law. That was on Wednesday afternoon. Thursday afternoon, at the close of business, we received a copy of a letter that the Attorney General's office had written to the judge. And their concern in this letter, it's quite shocking, their concern was not about the fact that people could die from taking the poison. Their concern is there might be some doctors out there that didn't know that this law was now suspended and maybe would give the poison and then be subject to criminal liability. So what's so shocking about that is that this is what the Attorney General was worried about: the potential liability of doctors who might not know that the law is in suspension, but the way they waited over 24 hours before sending that letter. Now, we all know, and you in the media know, that the Attorney General of New Jersey knows very well how to hold a press conference on short notice. There's no reason the Attorney General could not have held a press conference Wednesday afternoon, Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, we still haven't heard from him, to say that this law is suspended. All he was concerned about was what might happen to a doctor who didn't know, and he's asking the judge to clarify his order what his duty is. Well, we all know what his duty is. His duty is to protect the citizens in New Jersey. And while it's unfortunate that he's taking a stance to try to uphold the law, in the interim, when the law is not in effect and it's illegal for a doctor and a pharmacist to participate in assisted suicide in the state of New Jersey, and we hope that it will continue that way, it's certainly the Attorney General's job to take every measure possible to let every physician and every pharmacist in this state know. And unfortunately, the Attorney General has not, and I believe that's a true abrogation of the Attorney General's duty to all of us. I would like to conclude, and then we'll have time for questions. I'd like to conclude with the following. As I said before, Germany was a very advanced state. What they lost sight of was any divine aspect of humanity. Whether you believe in a God in the traditional sense, or you believe in divine energy, you believe in a universal consciousness, whatever your belief is, the fact is that we are not here by accident. And the challenge we face is once we allow human logic to rule the day, once we make decisions based on the fine print of the law and only are concerned about the regulations or liability, we're losing sight of the overarching purpose of our lives. And the overarching purpose of our lives is to bring more life into the world, to promote more life, to make life as positive and a life-building experience as possible for every single human being. And once we say we're going to allow our human logic to rule the day, then we can truly prove anything. Anything can be proved. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe stated this. He said that what happened in Germany was they took the education about God out of the schools in the late 1800s. It became a secular education. And once people are no longer looking to a higher source of wisdom, and it's purely human wisdom, there is truly nothing that human logic cannot prove. There's nothing that human logic cannot support. And you may think right now, well, there's this consensus that this is as far as we're going to go with human logic. But once we allow human logic to be the guiding force, there is no end to that. And that's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said is proven by the Holocaust. So the shocking reality is that we got to this situation because there is less and less sensitivity to human life. There is a less and less understanding that there's something beyond what we can understand, that human life is meaningful and precious whether we understand that or can prove it or not. And we do not run our lives based on logic and human proof, whether we can prove that our lives are precious and whether our life is beautiful and whether life is meaningful, no matter how terminal a doctor may have said, no matter, and again, we pray for everyone's recovery, how painful it may be at this moment in time. Beyond that logic that might tell a person to do one thing, there is something super logical, something beyond human logic, which says, no, this life is precious, and I can't explain it to you. I can't understand and tell you why this person breathing here is logically of value. But it is of value, and that's what we must hold on to. We must not let go of that. We must not let go of that human sense of preciousness of human life. And that tells us in our gut, and tells us in that inner wisdom that we all have, that life is precious, and we must not do anything to end it. We must not let ourselves become confused by the logical arguments and the car votes and the different ways it's only for these people. Once we allow ourselves into that arena of human logic, there is no limit to what a human being could accomplish, to the negative, God forbid. So with that, I want to thank you all. Again, thank Assemblyman Auth, and thank all of you for taking your time. I know that it's August, and there were other assemblymen and senators who wanted to be here, but because it's in recess and so forth, I know that you all have other things to do with your life in the summer, including vacations in the shore, I'm sure. But I appreciate that you're here, because this is truly an important matter for all New Jerseyans. Thank you.
Could you just clarify the timeline in terms of, you had said the Attorney General on Wednesday submits briefs, and then exactly what happens and what the timeline is?
Yes, the Attorney General has to submit briefs. I believe it's, I don't have that letter from the Appellate Division right here, right now, but it's Tuesday or Wednesday they have to submit electronic copies and then printed copies, and then by Friday we have to submit our opposition to their appeal.
And then we wait until October 23rd for additional...
Okay, good question. Two separate proceedings. One proceeding is in the Superior Court level. So how that happens is a temporary restraining order, which then would, in our position, should be converted to a preliminary injunction. The judge is going to allow, Judge Innes will allow briefing on that and have a hearing on October the 23rd. That's within his purview. And that is unaffected by the appeal until there's a ruling. Separately, the Attorney General has filed for leave to appeal and is now filing an appeal of his temporary restraining order. So that's a separate proceeding, which will have briefing, as I said, this week. If the Appellate Division will or may not grant oral argument, they may decide it on the papers whether or not to allow the temporary restraining order to continue until October 23rd or to overturn or dissolve this temporary restraining order until October 23rd. So that's going in the Appellate Division level.
Do we have any sense of a timeline for when they might make a decision, either orally or just based on the paperwork?
No. The
So
appellate.
they could do it the next day?
Yes. Yes.
I understand that one of your arguments is Dr. Glassman doesn't want to participate in transferring the file. I'm just wondering, when I went back into the law and sort of read the language about transferring the file, calls for transferring the relevant portion, but as a doctor, if your patient wants to go to another doctor, do you have currently, regardless of this law, before this law came into effect, can a doctor under any circumstance whatsoever decide that he doesn't want to transfer some patient files to another doctor? Or is that something, are you basically asking to create a new law where a doctor, if he believes the patient is going to seek physician-assisted suicide that the doctor doesn't believe in, that he should be allowed to withhold this patient's files?
That's a good question. That's not something that's a challenge posed by the current state of the law, because every doctor wants to see his patient do well, and if the patient wants to go to get a second opinion or change doctors, of course he would transfer the file. Here is a situation where the person is specifically transferring the file for the purpose of a doctor who's going to assist in this suicide murder process to now take the file. So the doctor is saying he does not even want to this is still his patient. He does not want to give that file to another doctor who has stated openly that he's willing to kill the patient.
But to that point, could a situation arise now where a doctor might feel that one course is the proper course and the patient feels differently, so decides to go to a different doctor who say will give them chemotherapy or something, that their current doctor doesn't believe that that's the proper course? Could that doctor right now refuse to transfer the files to the other doctor who believes in a different course?
I don't know if they could or would. I don't know that's. I haven't heard that situation presented.
Could you talk about Dr. Glassman? Was he involved? Did he testify at hearings? Or is there an organization that is supporting economically and spiritually, this effort to bring this challenge?
So Dr. Glassman has not testified yet, and it was not necessary at the temporary restraining order stage. It's based on the written papers.
I'm sorry, about the hearings and transfer
Right.
the bill passed.
Oh, no, okay, thank you for clarifying. Dr. Glassman was not a participant in the efforts to stop the legislation. And Dr. Glassman is not representing any organization in this process. In terms,
Paying you?
so in terms of support, we do have started a legal defense fund to help him defray the costs, which are significant. And we're talking about appeal after appeal in the forefront, and there's a GoFundMe page for the legal defense fund to raise $1 million to cover the litigation.
What is it called? Do you know?
The
The
GoFundMe.
GoFundMe page.
I have the link. I could
Okay.
give that to you.
A lot of your argument is kind of, there's a slippery slope argument that once you devalue human life, according to you, that, you brought up Nazi Germany, but speaking of just in terms of voluntary right to die laws, I think the Netherlands almost 20 years ago was the first state to enact this. I don't think anyone would argue that they've descended into anything close to what happened in Nazi Germany. Would you? They've had 20 years. What do you see in that?
So it's Oregon. Yeah.
So I would direct you to there's a Time Magazine article, and my office could provide that to you. There's a Time Magazine article from 2009 that addresses that question. And in that article, they quote a study that said that there were, I believe, 1 in 4 doctors that had said that in the Netherlands, that they had terminated their patients' lives without their consent. It started as totally consensual. Now it is extended beyond that. In addition, they quoted there a doctor from Holland who said that he had a Dutch nun who was a patient, and he felt that that Dutch nun, because of her religious beliefs, was prevented from asking for her life to be terminated, and therefore decided on his own behalf that he would have mercy on her and kill her. So that's what's going on in Holland. That was as of 2009. I have other information that talks about this being much more extensive now in terms of the people who are not able to consent. See, the law here in New Jersey is carefully constructed to allow only in the case of consent. I also have to bring to your attention, and you can find this online, that the organization Compassion and Choices has a sister organization called Final Exit. They both came out of the Hemlock Society, named after the hemlock that Socrates took to end his own life. And the Final Exit says that they do not believe in the 6-month rule. They think that's arbitrary. They think people of any condition and any length to live should be allowed to do this, and that they are actively going and teaching people about this possibility in facilities throughout the country, regardless of what actions the Compassion and Choices has taken. It's very clear from their website they're the sister organizations. So this is a reality in this country. It's not that the movement is really much larger than the presentation that is made, that it's merely this 6-month thing, and okay, well, if we just allow this, then these people will, these people who are suffering will have this option. This is a much larger campaign, and Final Exit is committed to that.
But Oregon has had the law for 20 years. We have, what do you see, and there have been challenges. So how do you feel that you will succeed and prevail in this case? Because right now it's just on the regulations. And ultimately, at some point, the state will develop these regulations.
So that's a great question. So while the judge Innes did say that he's focusing on the regulations, he's not the final say as to that. There will be an appeal in front of the appellate division, will be the other issues we raised. Ultimately, in front of the Supreme Court in New Jersey will be the other issues that we raised. And any appeal that we make, or either side makes, is going to raise those issues. We do not believe it should rest on the regulations issue. That's a very narrow, technical defect in the law, significant. But it was the eighth of our causes of action because we thought that the other issues are much more important.
Can you say what other specific claims you have that you think will withstand a legal test? Because, like she had mentioned, Oregon's law, which is very similar, has gone before the Supreme Court twice and been upheld. So, what's unique about the New Jersey case?
Well, first of all, New Jersey law, the New Jersey Supreme Court in Quinlan already said they don't allow this. So they're referring to something. They didn't say, we don't allow this until the legislature says it's okay. They said that we don't allow this. So I believe that this is a case that's ripe for adjudication in New Jersey, and that the Supreme Court, hopefully the courts before that will see that it should not be allowed, but then the Supreme Court itself will say no to this. So I believe that it has an excellent chance. I really believe it has an excellent chance, and it's very important that people should realize what's going on, what's at stake over here. I think that a lot of people are not even aware that this law existed, or the significance of it. In fact, the only article, I don't know if anyone's from the Philadelphia Inquirer over here, but I must give a shout out to a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer who, is that you?
No.
Okay. All right. So a shout out to someone from the Philadelphia Inquirer who wrote on August the 1st when this law came into effect. She raised the issue about the fact there's no regulations. No reporter in New Jersey, everyone talked about how the law is now in effect. Everyone talked in New Jersey. The media wrote articles how it's now in effect, it's now available. No one flagged the issue that the law requires regulations and they're not in effect. It took someone from Philadelphia who is a medical writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer to bring up that point. She said, why are there no regulations over here?
I don't know if you read the Bergen record, but I don't think that's totally accurate. But
I apologize if
okay.
someone else did, but that's where we first saw that
Sure.
issue.
What kind of medicine does Dr. Glassman practice?
Geriatric.
People who testified at the hearings in Trenton over the years said that, this isn't about, I got a terminal diagnosis and I don't want to go through the treatment. These people said, I just want to eliminate those final days where we're hovering in a coma, where the pain cannot be assuaged. It's funny that, usually Republicans are like hands-off government, like keep government out, and yet, this is an area that they want more government control, and, does it come down to, does the individual have any authority to decide when is enough? If it's just for those, you said for the last breath.
Right, so I can't address the Republican side of it. I'll let Assemblyman Auth if he would like to. But our position is no. There is no human authority to terminate one's life, a human life, earlier than it comes to an end.
Besides that, there's been great strides in palliative care, and that should be access to its ultimate. Also, the difficulty, and it was mentioned, the slippery slope. Our neighbors in the north, and David will tell you about this, are now contemplating reducing the age. You'll notice the legislation says 18 or older, and now there's consideration to reducing the age of someone who wants to commit suicide. You may want to discuss that, but that's where the issue for me starts coming into play. I don't believe in terminating life, period, but over and above that, once it's done, then there's laxed regulations, and regulations get drawn out and stretched out so that more and more people can be encompassed in the legislation. It becomes very, very dangerous, and that's why I want to try to put the brakes on it right now.
When you say in the north, what do you mean by that? North Jersey?
No, in Canada.
Oh.
In Canada.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, pardon me.
In Canada, there's now assisted suicide in Canada, and now there's a pediatricians organization that wrote an article about extending this to children, examining the question whether it could be done for children that have terminal illnesses and whether it could be done without parental consent. So these are people in Canada. They're close neighbors. This is something that's under discussion. And we all know that once something is under discussion, it's now becomes appropriate conversation, and then it becomes something that someone could then extend the law to that. So that's what's so dangerous about this. It's dangerous in the current moment, and it's dangerous in the long term also. There is, like you were saying, I can't remember who asked the question about the other states and other countries, but there is precedent that this actually goes further than the initial carve-out that is being done at this point. Also, I wanted to point out to you that a lot of the people that testified, you talked about the people that testified, and I was not involved in that process at all. But in just sort of becoming familiar with some of that, a lot of people testified about how they wanted this option. They weren't necessarily planning on taking it like you were referring to. And the fact is, this is not an option that's available. This is not an option that should be available. And this is not an option for human beings to terminate their life early, no matter what the circumstances.
There was also a lot of testimony in those hearings from people who had been diagnosed as being candidates for having their lives terminated, and they were.
Excuse me, Assemblyman, could you speak in front of the
Yeah,
mic,
come,
please?
Oh, excuse me.
Thanks.
So there were people that came in and testified who had been diagnosed as being 6 months terminal, and they were there years after, still now at this point saying, please don't do this because it's not the right thing to be doing. So there's a completely opposite side to this, the side that gets most of the public recognition of the people who want to eliminate their lives early or prematurely, or somebody who's goading them on to say that. But there are quite a few people, as many if not more, who will tell you that is not the right thing to do because they have personal experience saying that was not the right thing for them to do.
Assemblyman, what is your chief beef here? What is the main point that you believe is most important in this whole argument?
Once this process starts, it can grow and grow and grow. The limits, the restrictions become laxed and laxed and laxed, and there's no telling where it will finally stop. This is not something that the state should engage in. There should be conferences between patients and physicians. And the Physicians Association in this state has said they do not approve of this. They were against it adamantly. And I think it's up to us to listen to what the physicians say.
Was that the what?
The AMA.
organization?
The
AMA?
Yes. Who is the state? Who's the governor? Who's the attorney general to interfere with what a doctor should prescribe to his patients? And if a doctor is not prescribing that, why should we be sitting there forcing that into the mix? I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It's absurd.
I want to read something from the law itself. And just from being down here covering these issues, there is an acknowledgement that that the law would take effect 4 months after the date of enactment, but that the various divisions and boards that you cited may take anticipatory administrative action in advance thereof as shall be necessary to the implementation of this act. This is not unusual for a law to have that kind of language, that while we're getting up to speed, agencies can take action. Is it your position that none of that had happened?
Yes, and it's uncontested by the Attorney General's office that there's no agency has promulgated rules. And it's also our position, and actually the judge's position, Judge Innes's position, that that's not a voluntary matter. The legislature was giving instructions to each one of those agencies because it doesn't say the Department of Transportation over there. It only lists agencies that have direct influence on this process, whether it's the Board of Medical Examiners, pharmacists, psychologists, because they're involved in the capability assessment, social workers, and of course the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'd like to answer your question earlier. I looked up the GoFundMe page is called Fighting New Jersey Physician Assisted Suicide Act.
Fighting New Jersey, NJ?
New Jersey Physician Assisted Suicide Act.
It's spelled out New Jersey.
It is,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
thank you.
You know, I'm surprised no one's spoken about the penalties for coercing somebody into making a decision of assisted suicide. It's a crime of the third degree or the fourth degree, and we've had introduced legislation to change that, make it a crime of the first degree, because the result is the same. It's tantamount to murder. Someone's going to actually kill themselves after being coerced. Or how about someone who decides to change their mind and delivers a note to someone to send to their physician, and the note gets subverted? That's a crime. I changed my mind. But now all of a sudden somebody else is interceded, taken the note, put it someplace else, and then they administered the medication, the poison. And
Well, a person gives it to themselves, when you say administer, right?
we would hope so. We can't guarantee that.
Are you saying that doctors are gonna be doing this?
I'm saying, you know, who knows how people act in nursing homes? If you have someone who's got a health policy that has created a situation where they'll have health care provided to them and medical care provided for them if they're in a state where they need a nursing home, people buy that type of insurance. And they'll have $1,500 a day dedicated toward that type of coverage. And another person who's in under a Medicare or Medicaid, well, a nursing home operator is looking at that, and there's a profit quotient in there all of a sudden. I have a patient that's paying me $150 a day. I have one waiting that wants to pay me $1,500. Who knows?
Also, just on that point, I mean, you know, we don't want to ascribe ill motives to anybody, but the temptation is there. And the fact of the matter is, family members might put this in someone's, you know, granny's applesauce, and this is something that is a real concern. We're talking about the availability of poisons to end a human being's life. There is no way to say it's only going to be used the way the law intends it to be used, which is, as you're saying, it's a voluntary process. But there's nothing that prevents it from being otherwise for people who might want to take matters into their own hand. And we see that, even though the doctor is not required to be there by this law, we see that in other countries, the doctors are giving it without consent. And like I said, mentioned Holland, and even in New Jersey. So even if the doctor is not there, the assisting physician is not present. He wrote the prescription, the prescription's fulfilled, the person's now at home. There's other human beings that are around, and we have no idea how this is actually going to play itself out. And that would be definitely a concern.
What's the
Yes?
name, what's the name of the articles or the studies saying that? If you want to-
So that's a Time magazine article, and I'd have to look that up, sorry.
The other thing is this too, you have one caregiver in the home taking care of somebody who's getting palliative type care. Becomes overburdening after a while. There's a point where they may crack. No one's there to give them any assistance, to give them a break, get them out. People make errors in judgment. You know, it's not necessarily a willful thing, it's people snap.
I mean, I think the other states having these laws are instructive where that hasn't been.
David, what was it? There's 7 states that have it. I think there's 9 states that enacted legislation that said they would absolutely refuse to do it.
Yeah, there are more, yeah.
Right, so, and that's a really important point, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm looking up that at the same time, but we'll get you that information for the time, and anyone who was here will get you the Time magazine article. It's really important, you know, a lot of the way these things go into effect, and they kind of like, there's this wave effect, you know, everyone else is doing it, why aren't we doing it? And in fact, the judge wanted to know how many other states have done this. And of course, we don't think that's relevant because we, as New Jerseyans, have a right to pass our own laws and have our own laws evaluated by our courts. Regardless of, even if 49 other states did it, New Jersey is allowed to say no. But the interesting thing is what in every media article says, New Jersey is the 7th or 8th state to actually do this. It's under consideration by a certain number of other states. But you don't see in every newspaper article that 9 other states have moved against it. And that's really critical information. Because if you're a consumer of the news and you're reading the news and you're trying to, you know, you're getting an impression that this is just kind of sweeping the country. And really, it's not sweeping the country. It's true, unfortunately, 7 states did it. but there's 9 states that have moved against it and made it hard, stronger, the laws against it. So that's really significant, that the consensus in this country is not for physician-assisted suicide. And I don't believe it's going to be, and I certainly pray that it never does become that way.
Is there an organization that tracks how many states have moved against it? Like, how do you know there's not?
And please forgive me, I've just seen a lot of information, so I can't tell you all the details but we could try to get that information for you. If you give me your information, we'll point you in that direction.
Meaning it passed laws to say.
They did,
can't
yeah,
do this.
right, they did things that made it, every state obviously doesn't allow it except for the 7 that passed it, and I think 2 states, the courts said that it was allowed within the current laws, but then other states took affirmative action to make it clear that this is not allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. If you could, anyone who wants further information, if you leave your information with me, I'd be happy to respond to individual questions or get you the information.